Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the May community meeting. I'm so happy many of you could join us. I see loads of familiar names, and thank you for coming. It is so good to see you, even if it's just your name. I know you're there in attendance, so it's cool to feel your presence. I'm very much looking forward to our speaker this evening, and I'm going to get right into her bio. I do want to introduce her right away and give her all the time to, deliver this presentation and get a bit of feedback from you. So, Dr. McDonald has been practicing as a family physician for over 30 years. She attained her Bachelor of Arts in Science from the University of Guelph and her medical degree from the University of Toronto, followed by a postgraduate residency in family medicine. She has had an active private practice, treating a range of patients, from newborns to palliative care. She worked in chronic care institutions, occupational insurance medicine, urgent care walk-in clinics, and cancer detection clinics. Pardon me. She has been on staff at the University of Toronto Health and Counselling Centre for over 20 years, caring for a diverse student population with complex psychological, social, and physical conditions. Through her exposure to a wide range of challenges, problems, and illnesses that her patients brought to her attention, Dr. McDonald has not only dealt with the wide spectrum of health and disease, but she has also come to appreciate the limitations within the healthcare system. She has come to realize the importance of participatory medicine as a crucial component of Western medicine that is all too often neglected. As a way of addressing this deficiency and how healthcare is delivered, she became involved in the mindfulness training. As a mindfulness teacher, she helps people realize how mindfulness practice can help us modify certain aspects of our lives by becoming conscious of our attitudes, thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and relationships. This endeavor can deeply affect our health in positive ways. Dr. McDonald's meditation experience began over a decade ago with Dr. Trevo at the Mindfulness Center in Oakville, when she took the introductory mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Since then, she has continued with his intensive mindfulness teachings by attending the weekly Mindsight intensives for several years. She went on to study mind and body medicine with John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santorelli, and further deepened her MBSR training through her teacher training program at the Center for Mindfulness and Medicine, Healthcare, and Society at the University of Massachusetts. She broadened her experience of mindfulness-based interventions through professional trainings with Zendel Siegel and in mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy, and with Dr. Jean Christeller in mindfulness-based eating awareness training. To further enhance her expertise in Vipassana insight meditation, she studied with Shinzen Young and with Satya Narayan Goenka, who is associated with the Insight Meditation Society. She's also trained with Jack Hornfield and Daniel Siegel, interfacing Buddhist psychology with interpersonal neurobiology. Dr. McDonald has also studied with Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, the originators of the Mindful Self-Compassion 8-week program, as well as others in the self-compassion community. She is qualified as a teacher in mindful self-compassion, and she maintains an active hatha yoga practice alongside her daily meditation practice. Her personal dedication to the practice of mindfulness has been transformative in both her personal and professional life, and she continues the ongoing journey of strengthening her embodiment of mindfulness as a way of being, moment by moment. So everyone, please welcome Dr. Linda McDonald.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and everyone. Welcome. I'm very happy to be here, very happy that you've asked me to speak. I'm not sure who that person is that you just talked about for 5 minutes, but I'm feeling very old and, but perhaps, can I say a little bit wise, maybe, with much humility. So, yeah, so I thought today that we would really start with, let me just get my first slide up here. Again. All right. There we go. And okay, just a little bit slow getting started, but I think we're good. No, not good. So There. Okay, so I thought we'd start with really expelling some of the myths around what mindfulness is and what mindfulness isn't. Then we'll talk a little bit about what mindfulness practice is, and then also why we would want to endeavor in such an effort. And then go into a little bit of the neuroscience, a little bit of the interpersonal neurobiology, very on a basic level. We'll have an opportunity for a little bit more practice, and we'll have some opportunity for questions and answers as we go through. Just to bring your attention to, you've probably all been on this site and know it better than I am, but to let you know that I will not be monitoring the chat box, but I will monitor the Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, because I won't, with my simplified brain, be able to look at too many boxes. Thank you. So the big question, what is mindfulness? What is mindfulness? And you look that up, you're gonna find very different and varied definitions of what is mindfulness. I'm going to use the definition of Jon Kabat-Zinn here, or an adapted definition from Jon Kabat-Zinn. Jon Kabat-Zinn was the originator of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, and he actually was the one that brought in mindfulness in a very systemized way, if you will, in the late 70s to the Western medical system. The way that he describes mindfulness is really a state of mind, and it's a state of mind in which we remember to pay attention in a particular way. And that's a way that we're not routine familiar with. And it's a way that we pay attention on purpose, this with intentionality, in the present moment, and impartially. So I'm sure you're no clearer at understanding what mindfulness is than you were 2 minutes ago. So let me break that down a little bit. So in mindfulness, we really, it is about paying attention with an intention to pay attention for no other reason than to notice how we construct our experience of reality. And that's it. There's no other goal. It happens in the present moment, that is now, as a sequence of moments unfold from moment. It's about observing our direct experience, how we live our life. It's about observing the directly felt experience, not from the lens of our stories about the past or the future or the way that we construct a reality, but actually the felt, lived reality. Oh. One more. So this little diagram shows a circle, and in the middle, the oval shows just a diagrammatic presentation of the present moment. So in the present moment is really the arising of new experiences. It's the only moment we have to live. Things are only happening in the present moment. However, the present moment also contains a very sliver of the past. It has a sliver of our conditionings. It informs the present moment. And it also, our brains being anticipatory machines, has a little sliver of anticipations of the future based on the past and the present arisings. This will become more significant when we start to look at what happens to the present moment when we practice mindfulness. And so the third part of the definition is that of impartiality. The original definition from Jon Kabat-Zinn said with non-judgment. People get confused because they think that they're not allowed to judge, and yet, let's face it, folks, we are pretty much judging machines. We have opinions and thoughts about just about everything. But what we do in mindfulness is that we are impartial witness to our own experience. And this includes noticing when we judge and not judging the judging. So to put that all back together, it's a state of mind where we pay attention on purpose in this present moment with impartiality. So what mindfulness is not is that it is not a relaxation exercise. It may be relaxing, it may not be relaxing, but the goal of meditation is not relaxation. In fact, the goal of mindfulness is really to let go of the goal and really to simply be with things as they are. it's very much not a quick fix. Sometimes when we practice mindfulness, sometimes we feel at peace and we feel calmer, and other times we may be bored or restless or agitated. The practice is really a process that unfolds over time that helps us to be with our experience as it is. The paradox, as you'll hear me talk about, is that the more that we can drop into the way that things are in this moment, the more that they're able to change in a more healthy direction. It also is more than a technique. Yes, there are techniques involved in it, but mindfulness is actually a way of life. It's a way of being. It's a particular lens through which we can then choose to see what is happening. So essentially, it's an awareness practice. It's an awareness practice. Now, as human beings, we all have the ability to be aware. I'm aware that I'm sitting on a chair, that it's a beautiful day, that I'm a bit cool in the air conditioning. We have lots of things that we can become aware of. But it's incredible how much of our lives we don't live from that place of awareness, but rather we live from a place of automaticity, of autopilot. That is, the system does what the system does, and we really are not present for that. You might have had that experience where you've been driving somewhere, driving down to the Blue Jay games when they were open. And, you could hit Spadina and it's like, whoa, how did I get here? Who's actually driving this car? Because I have no awareness of how, where I am. Or you might have found sometimes you can eat your meal and didn't even taste it. You had no awareness of that happening. You can even be talking to somebody face to face, and yet you're not actually there. You're not aware of what's happening. Your mind may be thinking about, all the things that you need to do or what's for dinner. So even though we have this capacity of humans to be aware, most of us live from a place of non-awareness, from a place of mindlessness, and we've practiced that for most of our lives. And this is why part of the practice of mindfulness, or essentially the practice of mindfulness, we have to practice that because we're not very good at it. So in the practice, we learn to attend to the mind instead of following it, and we learn to engage the mind instead of being engaged by it. So when we come back to this awareness of the present moment, if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see, again, the present moment is represented by that very small kind of oval diagram. And so when we're on autopilot and our organism, our human organism, our nervous system is just running on its own without us having the awareness of that, the sliver of the past becomes very wide. In fact, it takes over. And those past conditionings then very much inform what we anticipate for the future. So we have very little ability to skillfully respond to what's happening. Rather, we tend to go right into that reaction mode. What we always did, we always do, and we tend to react automatically. Now you look on the right-hand diagram where it says mindfulness on the top, and you can see that in that diagram, the present moment is much larger. That is, we're actually paying attention to these new arisings of experience in that moment, such that, yes, there's still a sliver of the past and there's still a sliver of the future, but we can actually drop in to what we're noticing, what thoughts, what feelings, what physical sensations we're noticing, be aware of actually what's happening, so that we can then, in that pause of awareness, of just noticing, it then opens the door to allow us to make a more skillful action, perhaps, a more healthy action. And that's what we call responding instead of reacting. So when we bring in mindfulness to when we bring awareness to our experience, it really allows for this opening of a freedom and often a liberation from our past conditionings. So how do we cultivate this mindfulness? What do we do? What is practice of mindfulness? How do we get there? The first thing is we have to stop. And I love this acronym, STOP. And the first, it stands for, the S of stop is to actually stop moving, to just take a moment to stop. The T is to take your space or take a deep breath. The O is to observe, not to change anything, but simply observe. And the P is then to remain in this new awareness with new options as we move forward. So let's just try that out for just 1 minute. So whatever you're doing now, if you can just stop, be still, let your limbs be still. And then take a deep breath, just to settle into your body and notice what's here. The observe is not changing anything, but notice what's on your mind. Maybe notice position of your body or any tensions you may be holding. Maybe notice a feeling. Maybe there's an anticipation, a boredom, a restlessness, a peacefulness. Just notice what's here right now. And then from this place, this new awareness will continue. And although this acronym STOP is very powerful, the hardest thing really is to remember to stop. We get so much on this automaticity and so much in this autopilot that we just go, go, go. We do. We're great doers. And it's very hard for us just to stop into the moment of being. So in mindfulness, then we need to be very clear how we're going to use our mind to develop this awareness. And you know, in real estate, I have a real estate friend and she always tells me, Linda, you know what the most important thing is in real estate? The 3 most important things: location, location, location. Well, just as in mindfulness, the 3 most important is attention, attention, attention. It's right in the definition, paying attention on purpose. So we're going to really be working with attention. And attention is really that focusing of awareness. But gets a little bit more complicated than that, or complex, I should say. Because we're all used to paying attention. You know, we can pay attention to all kinds of things. You know, can pay attention while I'm, mowing the lawn or petting the dog. You only have to have had a teenager in the house, and they can pay attention for many hours at a time in front of that Nintendo machine. And I tell you, they're very concentrated. But this is an exogenous type of attention. This is an attention that's externally motivated, that really is involved in a task or a circumstance. It's really, we don't have awareness or intentionality. We're just automatically paying attention. That's not the kind of attention that we're going to be cultivating in mindfulness. We're going to be cultivating something called endogenous, that is inside, internally motivated attention. And that means paying attention for no other reason than to pay attention. It's an intentional state of openness to whatever's going on. And when this attention is directed with this intention, in combination with a certain attitude that I'm going to talk about next, then we call that mindful attention. So attention is not enough to be mindful. But just one more word about attention before I go into the attitude with which we pay attention. And that is, how do we, really work with our attention? So when we pay attention, we may decide to focus our attention somewhere, maybe on the breath or another sensation in the body. So we aim our attention. And then in mindfulness, we try to sustain it there. When you aim and sustain your attention, you're really building a concentration. So we're really building concentration. But if I ask you right now, you can all try this, just put your attention right now, aim your attention into the soles of your feet. Can you do that? Just put your attention there. Just notice what you notice. Maybe the touch of your foot and you're on the floor, maybe a coolness or warmth, a moisture or dryness, tingling or burning, or maybe you don't notice anything. Just notice, keeping your attention there as best you can. And what did you notice? Most of us, within probably half a second, will notice that, oh, our mind went somewhere else. Our attention went somewhere else. Even though I had my intention to put my attention in the soles of the feet, it got caught off, the wandering mind. And what I want to really emphasize here is that wandering minds are normal. I mean, this is what minds do. They wander as hearts beat, as lungs breathe, minds wander. It is normal for minds to wander. And one of the first things that people notice when they start to try to be still and put their attention somewhere is just how busy that mind is, going all over the place. And the Buddhists would call it the monkey mind, just going from branch to branch. So, and a lot of people have the misconception that mindfulness is about, stopping thinking and, making the thoughts go away. Well, I ask you, how can that be? How can you do that? We can't do that. But what we can do is actually change our relationship to the wandering mind. And so when we notice that when we aim our attention, put it somewhere and try to keep it there, at some point, we may notice that we're no longer on our intended focus. As I pay attention to the soles of the feet, I may be, what's for dinner? Or, there's a sound out there. Mind goes other places. The moment you notice that is actually a moment of mindfulness. And so in the Mindfulness Center, we have you congratulate yourself to notice that, because it is a moment of mindfulness. It's a positive thing to notice that, not a negative thing. Oh my God, my mind is going somewhere else. No. Oh, interesting. Name what caught your attention. Oh, thinking or worrying, planning. And then you simply redirect the attention back to the intended focus. So the wandering mind is no longer a problem. We know how to deal with that. Congratulate, name what distracted you, and then redirect attention to the intended focus. And every time you do that, you are strengthening the mindfulness muscle, changing those neural circuits in the brain. But there's more to it, because attention is not enough. We have to pay attention with a certain kind of attitude. When we simply pay attention, it highlights or brings online a part of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, but it doesn't involve the part of the brain that's very transformative and integrating into health and harmony. It doesn't involve the medial prefrontal cortex, which I'll talk about later. So we need this attitude. And the attitude that we bring to mindfulness, the attitude that we bring to our attention, is really one of curiosity, of being open, of being accepting. And when we do that, it's a very kind-hearted, loving attention. So when we pay attention, we bring curiosity as if never experienced whatever we're experiencing before. And we haven't experienced before. They're all new arisings in the present moment. So we bring this real, curious beginner's mind. Not the curiosity of why am I having this? Why am I experiencing this? Why is my mind so busy? No. It's the curiosity of, oh, look at that, noticing that. Oh, my mind is so busy. Oh, there's a pain in my knee. Interesting. So we bring that kind of curiosity, and we're open to whatever comes to our awareness, whether we like it or whether we don't. Not excluding anything because we don't want to feel it or think about it necessarily. And there's an accepting quality of this attention. And the accepting quality is that we bring equal attention to those parts of our experience that we like and that we don't like, that we find pleasant or unpleasant. It's often a misunderstood word, acceptance, but in this context, it's not about just accept things, benign resignation, I've got a really nasty boss, I'll just accept it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about acceptance of your experience in this moment. In this moment, I may feel sad. In this moment, I may have a pain in my neck. In this moment, I may have a busy mind. You simply accept that this is what's here, whether I like it or not. And when we do that, it really, the emergent property, if you will, of love may arise. So then the question is, okay, we have our intention to pay attention with a certain attitude. Then what do we pay attention to? What do we actually pay attention to? And there's many ways that teachers and over the years have have divided up basically the way that we experience life and how we can pay attention to that. But I'm going to introduce something called the Wheel of Awareness. And this is developed from Dan Siegel, who does the work in interpersonal neurobiology. I think it's a nice visual metaphor to help us kind of unpack this sort of complicated or complex experience that we have as human beings. So in this metaphor, on the screen, you'll see the circle. And if you can imagine that this circle is a bicycle wheel. So the outer circle is the rim of the bicycle wheel, and the inner circle is the hub of the bicycle wheel. And the rim of the wheel represents anything that you can become aware of, anything in your subjective experience that you can become aware of. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, physical sensations, anything that we can actually become aware of is on the rim. So it's all the knowns of our experience. The hub, on the other hand, represents the knowing of that experience. So it represents the awareness itself. So I can be aware of something. So if there's a sound, that would be on the rim. When I have the awareness of the sound, I'm in the hub. And they're quite different. And then we can choose from this place of awareness of the hub to send our attention as a spoke to pay attention to anything on the rim. So you can see that this circle has got 4 quadrants in it. And this is the way that Dan Siegel has divided up how we can explore our subjective experience. So on the first part of, maybe I have to move this, right? I can't move it anyway. So on the first quadrant on the right upper, you'll see, my head might be in the way here, but that represents really the first 5 senses. So that's everything that is on the outside world that comes inside. That's what our senses do. They bring the outside world inside. So we can pay attention to sight, we can pay attention to sound, taste, smell, touch, anything external, and that's called exteroception. We can also pay attention to the internal world, interoception, inside our body, or soma, that is the somatic felt sensations. The direct sensations that we're feeling, not the thoughts about the sensations, which is a very different experience. So in the soma, we would pay attention to, for example, sensations sitting on the chair, or tingling, burning, numbing, aching, pulsating, radiating. Those are kind of direct physical descriptive sensations that we can have. We can also choose to pay attention to the third quadrant, or the 7th sense, and that's called cogniception. These words are awfully big, but it simply means any of our mental activities. We can choose to pay attention to our thoughts, our perceptions, our memories, anything that the mind can make up, basically. And then the 4th quadrant is that we can also choose to pay attention to our relatedness to ourselves, to each other, to the planet at large, our interconnectedness. We can actually choose to be aware of how we are connected. Of course, a model like this is very simple and cannot possibly capture the complexities of what it's like to be human. And so when you get into things like emotions, feelings, they can sort of cover a couple of quadrants. They involve physical sensations. They also involve thoughts. But without getting into too specifics, our emotions are actually the regulatory sensations that affect all of our experience. So in this model, we've adapted Dan Siegel's, and you can see maybe a sort of a gradient of pink, because emotions affect how we think, how we feel, how we sense our body, how we sense our relatedness. But don't get too caught up with that at the moment. So I thought that perhaps I would give you a little bit more of a felt sense of what I'm talking about, and maybe just guide you through maybe a 10-minute or so practice of a wheel of awareness practice. So just right now, just making yourself comfortable in a comfortable position, upright, sort of dignified, but not rigid, allowing your spine to stack so that you feel most supported within this field of gravity. And just releasing any tension that's in your body. And with your eyes open, just now allow your attention to move to the floor of the room. Without moving your eyes, just let your attention go to the floor of the room. And now let your attention go up to the ceiling without looking at the ceiling. Just let your attention go there. And now bring the attention into the middle of the room. And then bring the attention a little bit closer at about that arm's length where you'd be reading a book. So you notice how you have this ability to move your attention around. So now we're going to take our attention and put it inward a little bit towards our body. So if it feels okay to you, allow the eyes to go closed, either partially or fully. Just give a moment to settle into your body and feel your posture sitting, perhaps feel the imprint of your body on the chair, the cushion. And now, as you're ready, as we use this visual metaphor that I've just been talking about, the wheel of awareness, we're going to now intentionally put our attention in that first quadrant in the exteroception. And I'm going to choose the sense of sound. So when you're ready, just put your attention into hearing, into sound. It's almost as if your attention was at the opening of your ears and letting the sound just come to your ears, not searching for sound. And as best you can, paying attention to the directly lived experience of sound. So that is the tone, the intensity, beginning, the end, pitch. Notice how there's a tendency of the mind to label sounds. And so when we are paying attention to a car, that's the sound of a car, we're actually not paying attention to the lived experience of the sound. We're living from the thinking about or the construction of the sound. So as best you can, just listen to the quality of the sound. Notice how you may be drawn to certain sounds or drawn away from certain sounds, how there are sounds that are close and others that seem to be further away. And as you aim your attention in sound and sustain it there as best you can, when you notice that your mind has wandered off, congratulate yourself. Oh, Linda's guiding a sound practice and I'm thinking about what's for dinner. Interesting. Label what caught your attention or thinking, and then gently but firmly redirect the attention back into hearing, into sound. No judgment required. It's kind of like training a puppy who keeps running off. I'm curious, that curious little puppy. And now releasing your attention, your focus of awareness on sound. This time, put the attention into the body, into the felt sense of breathing. Just notice your body breathing. How do you know you're breathing? Perhaps there's a movement of your chest, the rising of your chest, the falling of your chest, an inhale and exhale. Perhaps for you, you feel the expansion of the lower belly on the inhale and contraction on the exhale, or Perhaps you have that felt sense of air moving at the nostrils, cooler air coming in, the warm, moist air coming out. And as best you can, keeping your attention into this felt sense of breathing. There may be thoughts about breathing. Oh, am I breathing right? Am I breathing shallow? Am I breathing? It's not where our intended focus is. We just notice those as thinking, but really the felt sense. Perhaps noticing the different sensations that we have on the in-breath, the out-breath. The in-breath is associated with a sympathetic arousal. The hormones give more of an activating nature. The out-breath is a parasympathetic arousal. Tends to be more calming and grounding, releasing. Just notice, how does that feel in the body? As best you can. And when you notice the mind has wandered, which it inevitably will, congratulate yourself for noticing, label where the attention was drawn to, and then redirect into the body, into the felt sense of breathing. Okay, good. And now release the attention on the breath. Just bringing your attention now to the entire body sitting here. Perhaps your posture and those parts of your body that are being supported, maybe the soles of your feet or your buttocks. And then as you're ready, just slowly opening your eyes. So in that practice, we visited the first quadrant, we visited the second quadrant in Soma. We can also, if we had longer time and with more practice, we pay attention to thoughts or interconnectivity. But I thought it might be helpful now to maybe entertain any questions that you might have had so far, either about the practice or anything I've talked about. And if you have any questions, just to shoot them off in that Q&A box. And as you're sitting here, there's no waiting in mindfulness. As you're sitting here, simply noticing what's arising. Your thoughts come and thoughts go. Well, it doesn't seem to be too many questions at this moment. We'll have an opportunity to, if anything arises for you, to leave a little bit of time at the end as well, if anything comes up. So I'd like to, let's see now, I'm gonna share my screen again, right? Yeah. Now what do I do? Perfect. Okay, so now I thought I would take this a little bit of time to talk a little bit about perhaps some of the science behind what happens when we pay attention this way in mindfulness. I'm going to take the approach of interpersonal neurobiology, which is a bit of a conciliant approach that Ben Siegel has brought together, bringing many different disciplines, contemplative practices, philosophy, science, neurology, sociology, and to try to really understand how we as humans create and understand reality. So going back to the very basics, we think, well, what is everything? What is reality? What is everything? Well, everything in its very basic level is energy. Everything is energy. We tend to look at things in the world as objects, as solid. I'm looking at the coffee table or the book, and it looks as if it's a solid collection of objects. And yet, in fact, there's always energy flow that's coalesced in different patterns. I mean, the the energy flow of the atoms and molecules of the table is very different than the energy flow even of a book. It's very different than the energy flow of a sound wave or of an emotion. These are all at the very basic level energy flow. So everything is energy flow in different formations. Nothing is ever static. Everything is flowing. Everything is impermanent, and it's always coming and going. So for better or worse, you and the whole reality that you're embedded in, the whole reality of life, is all impermanent energy flow that comes and goes, arising and passing in every moment. Now, when we have a certain kind of energy flow, so let me give you a tangible example, because this gets a little bit out of most of our wheelhouses of the way that we think. So when we have a certain energy flow, say I give you just a pure sound energy. So I'm going to give you a sound that really has no meaning, like blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's a sound, right? So that sound, those sound energy waves, hit my tympanic membrane, causes it to vibrate in a certain frequency, stimulates the acoustic nerve, which stimulates the neural firing patterns. Those neural circuitries go up into the acoustic center of my brain, and it's registered as sound. Sound doesn't really have any meaning, it's just a sound. However, if that sound has then connects to other parts of the brain and is processed in increasingly complex ways, then that sound can actually start to point to something beyond itself, to a meaning or content. And we call that information. So in our example, if I give you a different sound, if I give you a sound that you've heard before, such as CN tower. Now, CN tower is still a sound, it's still sound waves, a different frequency of sound waves that hit my tympanic membrane, stimulated in a certain way, different frequency, acoustic nerve, different frequency, different neural circuitry patterns are fired, goes up to the acoustic part of the brain. Then it gets embedded into the cortex, associated with prior learning. Oh, that's a language, I've heard that before. And so this very complex neuro processing starts to then develop a meaning, so that sound is no longer simply energy, but it also now carries an information. And that's what we're talking about, information. Thoughts, for example, are all information. So that energy and information, they flow together all the time in our nervous systems. And it would be helpful for us to understand how this energy and information flows in this human system, in our neurological system specifically. And Dan Siegel developed this lovely little handy model, and pardon the pun, of the brain using his hand. And I'd like to walk you through basically what happens in this brain and the structures, and then we'll relate it back to mindfulness and what happens when we pay attention on purpose with an attitude of whole. So if you take your hand like this and have it oriented this way, and it's you've got the fingers here, the arm here, and it's really sort of in the center of your forehead, like this. That's the orientation. And so the arm represents our spinal cord. Our spinal cord, information coming up through the spinal cord. We get into the base of the hand, the base of the hand here, and that represents the brain stem. And these are very primitive, early structures in our evolution. And reptiles, for example, are only developed up into the brain stem. So you can imagine that the brain stem really only deals with those kinds of functions that are involved with survival. There's our fight and flight mechanisms. It has our alertness, our heart rate, blood pressure, that sort of thing. So that to the brain stem. But then as humans evolved, as evolution took hold more and more, we developed, as we got into the early mammals, this is what they call, represented by the thumb, the limbic system. And the limbic system is a series of structures, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the anterior cruciate, there's anterior cingulate, there's a few structures. But essentially, the limbic system is really our emotional center. It deals with production of emotions. It also is very much involved with the appraisal of the significance of things. It's where our attunement is, our relationships start to develop from the social brain, from the limbic system. And also, I said that wrong, sorry. It's in the attachment, not the social, it's in the attachment. So emotions, attachment, significance of appraisal of things. So when we're starting to get into those mammalian evolution, the limbic system comes online. Not until we start to develop into more higher primates do we develop into the cortex. And the cortex is from the back of the hand all the way to the front. And when the brain was being developed, it developed from bottom up, first the spinal cord, and then into the brainstem, limbic system, and then into the cortex. And the cortex is about, it's involved now with the representation of things. And so at the back of the cortex, in the more early mammals, there's more concrete representations. As we move forward, as we develop into humans, we have more abstract representations. We're able to think about judgments and morality, the concept of death, or even awareness itself. So we get more abstract as we move forward. And then I'd like to draw your attention to the fingertips themselves, the fingernails. And this is the prefrontal cortex, the before the cortex. So this is primarily, almost exclusively a human structure, although there is the very early development of it in certain mammals, dolphins, elephants, whales, and chimpanzees. So what we're interested here in mindfulness is particularly the middle two fingers, represented by the middle two fingers, which is the middle of the prefrontal cortex, in the middle of the prefrontal cortex. And I didn't mention one thing, that in the body, I mentioned lots of things, but in the body, around the gut, around the heart and lungs, there are a collection of neural networks that actually communicate with one another, and we call it the body brain. And the neural fibers from that body brain actually come right up through the spinal cord and deposit right into this part of the brain. This will be important to know in a moment. So when we're talking of mindfulness, we're really looking at this area of the brain, because this is what comes online when we pay attention on purpose. And so what we notice about this is not that there's anything different necessarily in the types of neurons. They're not specialized neurons necessarily, but it's really about the location of this. And if you really pay attention to it, you notice that the MPC, the middle prefrontal cortex, is one neuron away from the cortex. It's one neuron away from the emotional center, the limbic system. It's one neuron away from the brainstem, so our regulation of the body. And through these direct fibers that come up from the body brain, depositing into the MPC, we have access to those felt sense in the body, such as intuition. So what's unique about the MPC, the middle prefrontal cortex, is that it really is the master integrator. So it can connect these various parts of the brain. It can connect our thinking mind to our emotional brain, to our body regulation structures. So very important. And the thing about this is that where attention goes, neurons fire, and where they fire, they rewire. And when we pay attention the way that we do in mindfulness, endogenous attention with an attitude of pull, this is what comes online. This is where attention goes, neurons fire. So when we pay attention in this way, it's the neurons of the MPC that are firing. And it's kind of like working out a muscle. You know, if we fire those neurons more, they get better developed. And so the function of the MPC gets stronger, it grows. What we practice grows. As we practice paying attention, we practice being mindfulness, the function of the MPC grows. So the question is, well, what is the function? What does that do for me anyway? Well, as it turns out, there's a number of functions of the MPC. And I'll just go through them quickly, but just more to give you a sense of the broad-reaching effects of mindfulness. So the function of the MPC is really to regulate our bodies, our autonomic nervous systems, between sympathetic, parasympathetic systems. It's a function of attunement. Attunement means that felt sense that, you know, when somebody feels you, or I feel like I was felt in that, there's that attunement. It's involved with emotional balance. The MPC, when it's online, will help to balance our emotions, helps to modulate our fear. That means the MPC is what helps to calm ourselves down. That's the function. It allows us to be more flexible and responsive as opposed to reactivity. It's involved with insight. That is that ability to make a me map. I know where I've come from. I can understand. I can sort of time travel where I'm going. It's involved with the empathetic responses, the you map. I can understand and feel what you feel, but I can also understand what it must be like to be you and to feel what you're feeling. It's involved with morality, the greater good. And by virtue of the body-brain depositing right in the MPC, it allows us to access our intuition. So it's a pretty impressive list of functions. And when we practice mindfulness, we are strengthening those functions. We're able to regulate our emotions. We have more emotional resistance. We're able to calm ourselves down and reduce our stress. We're able to connect to people, look out for the common good. Really, these functions define what most people would consider a mental health. And in order for that to happen, we need this MPC, this great integrator, if you will, to bring together these different parts of the brain. Because when the brain is not being connected, then we feel dis-ease. And so you probably all had that experience at some point, you know, where your gut is telling you something, and then your head is telling you something else, and your emotions are telling you something else. And I have to tell you that the biggest mistakes in my life that I've made is when I've really not paid attention to what's happening in my body, try to talk myself out of it into my head and totally ignoring what my feelings are saying. So that's what you call disconnection, and creates a lot of dis-ease and suffering in our lives. So when the system is integrated, it translates into health and harmony. Now, integration is a concept in this context is achieved through the differentiation of our experience and then holding that to allow for a linkage. So integration is the differentiation of experience and then the linkage, the balancing of linkage of that experience. So that if we have too much differentiation, it's chaos. We have too much linkage, it's rigidity. So we talk about this river of integration. And when our energy and our information is flowing quite in an integrated way, then we're feeling, you know, ease and calm. However, within this river of integration, we can quickly get to the bank of chaos or the bank of rigidity. And our system is always moving between this chaos and rigidity and into the integrated flow. Our problems come, of course, when we get stuck on one of those banks. You know, we get stuck in chaos. Anxiety would be an example of chaos. Rigidity would be an example of rigidity. Would be depression, for example. When you know things slow down, our thought processes aren't the same. We lose our motivation. We get stuck in this bank of rigidity. So the more that we're able to bring online the MPC to allow it to do its job, the more integrated that we become. How are we doing for time? Okay, I'll just talk for maybe a couple more minutes, and then we'll have some time for maybe a little bit of practice. So integration is really a state of health is really an integrated state where we have a balance between differentiation and linkage. Now, you notice in that practice that we did earlier, the Wheel of Awareness practice, what we were doing, we were differentiating our experience, differentiating the in-breath from the out-breath, the various sensations that we felt. We were differentiating different sounds. And then what did we do? We just held it in awareness. We just noticed it. We just observed it. We didn't do anything. We just allowed ourselves to observe it. And that is the linkage. So when we hang out in the hub of awareness and we differentiate the rim and we hang out in the hub, we're actually promoting integration by balancing those differentiation and linkage. So we can look at what it means to have a healthy energy and information flow. And Dan Siegel uses this triangle of energy and information flow. And one point of that triangle is the brain. And so in terms of what we're talking about, energy and information flow, the brain and also the extended nervous system that extends throughout the whole body, but that's too hard to say all the time. So when I say brain, I mean that. The brain is really the mechanism of how we move that energy and information flow through our system. On the second part of the triangle, we have relationships. And so relationships in this context is really the sharing of energy and information flow. You know, our brains are wired based on how we relate and have been related to others. And so energy and information flow that we share is through relationships. And then we have at the top of the triangle, we have the mind. Now we could probably talk for 12 hours on what is the mind, and there's not a lot of consensus, although we're moving in that direction. But for our purposes here, we could say that the mind is the regulator of this energy and information flow. So with our minds, we're able to monitor what's happening. I can monitor my breath. I can monitor what I'm listening to. We can actually pay attention in that way. And then I can modify that. So the mind is really this embodied brain and relationships in a relational relationships that regulates this energy and information flow. So, and the mind is actually emerges out of our whole system of energy and information flow within and between people. There's not a locus of mind that anyone's ever been able to find in the brain. It actually arises from the interaction of the complex system. So it's an emergent property. So the point here is that we can use the mind to rewire the brain and to regulate our energy and information flow in relationships, empathetic relationships, and integrated mind. And when we use our minds in this way that we do in mindfulness, when we bring online the MPC, where attention goes, neurons fire, and when they fire in this area, that we actually can change the wiring of the brain through these different mechanisms, through producing more connections, synaptogenesis, producing more myelin around nerves that make the induction faster, even the production of the stimulation of new neuronal stem cells to produce new neurons, and even to affect the way that our genes are expressed through the modulation of various hormones. So that's really what I wanted to say about that. This last slide, or one of the last slides, shows that this is a long-term practice. In order to get to the point where we're rewiring the brain, this is not something that we can just haphazardly practice every so often. The cruising velocity, once you're up and running, is really about an hour a day to keep the MPC online to develop the mindful muscle, if you will. So we always like to talk about the mascot, or the mascot in our practice is like the sloth. It's very slow process. Yeah. No quick fix as we come around. So do we have time for, I think we have time for maybe one other experiential technique. And this is something that I wanted to leave you with so that you could perhaps take it home and practice in your days. And it's called the 3-minute breathing space. And again, it's only 3 minutes, and you can do that many times whenever you can stop to remember during the day. Maybe put a little thing on your computer or something to remind you. And so I'd like to offer this 3-minute practice for you right now. So the first thing in a 3-minute breathing space is to stop. And again, once again, just stop what you're doing. Stop fidgeting, stop moving your feet around. Just drop into stillness. And the first minute, the 3-minute breathing space, is to bring your attention to awareness of what you're experiencing. The first step is awareness. So just bring your attention now to what's happening in your experience, your feelings, what's happening in your body sensations, sense of where you are, your posture, just acknowledging and registering your experience. Even if it's unwanted, just noticing. Nothing to do, just noticing. And now in the second minute, we're going to gather. First minute was awareness. The second is gathering and redirecting your full attention to the breath, the felt sense of the breath in the lower belly. Feeling the full length of each in-breath, full length of each out-breath as they follow one after another. The breath can function as an anchor to bring you into the present and help you to tune into this state of awareness. Just feeling the sensations of the breath in the lower belly. And as you notice that your mind wanders from the sensations in your lower belly, congratulate yourself for noticing. It's a moment of mindfulness. Note where the attention was captured and then gently but firmly redirect back, keeping that attitude of curious, open, accepting of what the experience is as best you can. And now for the third minute, the instruction is to expand. That means as you continue to focus on the breath in the lower belly, now expand that field of awareness around that focus of the breath so that it includes a sense of the body as a whole, posture, your facial expression, just breath and body. And then as you're ready, just opening your eyes and maintaining that awareness as we now move into our next moments. Okay, so that's all I'm going to present at this moment. So I see that there are a few questions. So let's just have a wee peek at some questions. And one question here is that when should I feel this? I have a very literal mind. When could I use this? Anybody hear me? Yeah. Um, well, that's an interesting question. Very good question. Um, it's not that there's any should involved. It's really about dropping into our awareness as it is, dropping into our lived experience as it is. So it's really not about using mindfulness to get anywhere. It's really about giving up that striving, giving up the ghost of getting anywhere. But in fact, mindfulness is really dropping into the way things are. So we really ideally, and what we hope for, is to have more and more mindful moments. So right at this moment, knowing, have that awareness of what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. So it's not about using it to get anywhere. And that will actually be counterproductive to your practice because it brings in a striving. And let's face it, we're all pretty darn good at striving, getting somewhere, getting a goal. And it's not that we don't have goals and aspirations. It's not what I'm talking about, but we have to let go of getting anywhere as we practice mindfulness, because we're practicing being with things right now as they are. If that makes sense for you. And what can we focus on to help guide our attention to positive senses like touch, etc.? What can we focus on? Well, you can choose to focus on really any part of your experience. As we get more practice, we start to really look at all of our subjective experiences and all of that part of the rim on the wheel of awareness. We can pay attention to touch, we can pay attention to sound, we can pay attention to emotions, physical sensations, all sorts of things we can pay attention to. I'm not sure if underneath this question is perhaps another question of maybe what can we pay attention to when we're in times perhaps of overwhelm, and when we're feeling very stressed and we're really out of our regulatory sort of mechanisms. Sometimes we need to focus on something to help to ground us, to actually be able to bring us within this sort of window of tolerance where we can actually bring the MPC online. Because if we're overwhelmed, no mindfulness is going to happen. When you're overwhelmed, your MPC is offline. We're not in awareness. We're not able to pay attention on purpose with this whole attitude. So sometimes we will take a particular focus, and some people find it may be a sound. It can be very grounding. A sight can be grounding. The soles of the feet, even the breath. But for some people find that actually activating. So you can experiment yourself what you find grounding, and to ground yourself and have the system calm to the point where you then can bring in mindful attention. And the question is there a difference in the benefit to breathing exercises versus mindfulness? And what are the differences in the benefits of both? Okay. Excellent question. So in mindfulness, we are really dropping in, as you've heard me say, into the way that things are. It's not about changing the way that we're breathing. It's not about sort of those pranayama exercises that you might find in yoga. Nothing wrong. Those are great. And certainly it's wonderful to learn how to breathe and engage our diaphragmatic breathing, etc. But in mindfulness practice, we meet our experience as it is. So it's so the benefits of learning how to breathe and really engaging all our lungs in a diaphragmatic belly breathing really is that, of course, it helps to oxygenate us better, really gives us the full potential of the capacity of our lungs to oxygenate our bodies, etc. Totally different kettle of fish for mindful awareness. When we bring mindful awareness to our breathing, we simply notice the breathing as it is. So there's a very fundamental difference that in mindfulness, we're not trying to achieve anything. We're not trying to make our breath a certain way. We're not trying to slow it down or speed it up. We simply notice as it is. And by noticing, we're differentiating how those sensations are, our experience, we're holding it in our awareness, not doing anything, we're just holding it in awareness. That simple act, of holding it in awareness allows the linkage, which helps the system to integrate and foster those 9 functions that we talked about: resilience, balance, response flexibility, and it allows us to then choose to respond in a way that is more skillful, as opposed to automatically responding in a way that's that we've been conditioned. Okay. What else do we have? Is there any evidence to prove that mindfulness will help to reverse or minimize the effects of a traumatic brain injury? Well, that's also a lovely question and important question, and a question that that research is, continues to work on. What I can tell you is that we know that the brain is plastic and has this ability to use the real estate, if you will, of the neurons in many different ways, and that through different rehabilitations, we can actually start to strengthen back parts of the brain that have been damaged. We see this, for example, in stroke, people who've had strokes. A lot of rehab, a lot of ways that we engage the brain can have very beneficial effects over time. It depends very much, of course, on the effect of the trauma, how much trauma. If we compare it to trauma of a broken leg, we can have a broken leg and we can do all the rehab and we can get it back to full function, or we can have a severely, compressed fracture that there's just so much damage that we can never get it back to full function, but we can perhaps gain some strength back. So it's a very difficult question, and I guess the answer really it depends. It really depends on where the injury is, how traumatic the injury has been, but stay tuned. It's particularly this really exciting research about regenerating nerves or working on that neurogenesis from the stem cells, etc. Yeah. Okay. How are we doing for time? You said that it's really necessary to engage mindfulness in a practice for an hour a day to develop and activate the MPC. Is this any form of mindfulness practice, or are there specific practices that are more helpful? Okay, so just to clarify, you can activate the MPC in a second right now by paying attention on purpose. So you don't need to practice an hour a day. What I meant by that statement is that to really develop the formal practices, we really need to develop the formal practices to allow for those longer term changes in the brain that will help us realize integration and feeling more healthy. So every moment of mindfulness is helpful. Every moment of mindfulness is helpful. And this is, really about bringing it. Mindfulness isn't about becoming a good little meditator. Mindfulness is it's a way that we live our lives. So we start to notice, the color of the carrots as we cut them, and the strength and the feeling of our hands, or when we empty the dishwasher, we feel the texture and the warmth and the heat, etc. We notice when we get carried away with our thoughts, and we come back to the present moment experience. Because what happens typically is that we're not present when we're here. We're not present. I'm emptying the dishwasher, I'm off thinking about, the fight I had with my boss or some such thing. And we actually miss those moments, those rich moments of our lives that give it life meaning and vividness. So for serious practitioners who want to do the hard work, and it's a lot of effort, many are called, as they say, but few are chosen. That is, we get into the hard sort of trenches of being with our experience. It's not easy. The instructions are simple, but it's not easy to be one who practices. And that's why we often will practice in groups and continue to have a teacher, because essentially we're wired to move away the things that we don't like. We're wired evolutionary to, get away from things that don't feel good. And yet in mindfulness practice, what's happening is we simply, but not easily, start to be with those things that we find most difficult. But that's the route to health. So good. What else? Can you say more about the body brain? Well, what I can say about the body brain is that really it's a set of these neuronal fibers that are around our gut, around the heart, the lungs, and maybe even now they're finding around some muscles that pick up the information in that part of the body, that process that information at that level in the gut before they send it up to the MPC. And that you may have had that felt experience yourself. You just had that gut feeling. You can't really put your finger on it, but there's something not right, about something that's happened, or you just have an uneasiness or gut feeling. And we think that that is really the basis of an intuition. And so when you can attune to that, it gives us more information. It gives us information from that level of our organism, so that we're actually being in tune with what's happening to us right now. If I have that sort of feeling, but I ignore it or don't pay attention to it, I can talk myself into all sorts of things and start making decisions from simply the thinking mind and really disavow this other wisdom of the body. So that's what we're talking about here, is really getting out of our heads, getting into the body and allowing the wisdom of the body to be accessed. And I got to tell you folks, the body is infinitely wiser than any of the thoughts that we can possibly come up with, in my opinion. And I find it hard to focus as my symptoms are overwhelming. Specifically severe sensitivity to sounds and vibrations. I feel shaky inside all the time. So again, a very important question. In order to access the benefits of mindfulness, in order to be mindful, we cannot be in overwhelm. So when we're in overwhelm, we have these deep evolutionary survival mechanisms that get triggered when a threat comes. And when that threat comes and these systems come online, from the level of the brainstem, our crocodile mind or our reptilian mind, the body takes over. We have no control over that. So if I go into overwhelm and fight and flight, it's because we're feeling threatened in some way. And at that point, the MPC is offline and it's just taken over by this crocodile brain. We cannot access these higher prefrontal areas when we're in a high threat mode. So the first thing I would say to you is at that moment, throw mindfulness out the window. I mean that earnestly. In that moment, you do whatever you can to ground yourself. And there are, as mentioned, there are certain practices, and maybe you found things yourself that may be helpful. Maybe it's a walk outside, maybe it's you need to connect and talk to somebody. Maybe it's a grounding of to the soles of your feet or part of your body that's neutral. It's hard to say, but starting to pay attention to what actually helps you to get out of that fight and flight, to get out of overwhelm. There's no mindfulness that's happening when you're out of that window of tolerance, no mindfulness at all. So it may be a relaxation program or progressive relaxation. There are many offerings out there that can help us to get to a level where then we can engage in mindfulness. But sometimes, we have to ground ourselves first and get out of that fight and flight before we can possibly engage to be mindful. Yeah. So knowing that it's not the be all and the end all. Can mindfulness help minimize the likelihood of experiencing Alzheimer's? Well, yet to be determined, but some pretty interesting research that's starting to come out around in this area. Essentially, in mindfulness, we engage those higher centers of the brain, where attention goes, neurons fire, keeping the brain active, keeping, sort of that level of interest and novelty, very important in Alzheimer's prevention. Focus time, ability to focus on a task and pay attention in that way. All these ways help to keep the brain active, if you will. I can't tell you the specific research that's coming out as of today, but I can tell you that there's lots happening, and it looks like there may be some positive benefits. I'm not talking about cure, but some positive ways that we can reduce the progression, perhaps, in some cases. Yeah. What is one of the best grounding tools that you have used or heard about? Perhaps something that was creative or unique. Well, that's an interesting question. Creative or unique? Well, there ain't no positive, there ain't no magic pill for that, right? There isn't any magic pill for that that's particularly unique. What we need to do is whatever we can do to get out of our threat system. Sometimes that is a soothing practice for some people, very soothing, an affectionate breathing practice, a relaxation practice. I think that in general terms, the further away that you get out of the body, the more grounding it is. So for many people, it is a sound. For many people, it may be a sight, just name 5 things you can see, name 4 things you can hear, name 3 things you can touch. So we're actually getting out of our cognition and our ruminative thinking and actually grounding into what our present moment experience is. Because most of the threats, most of the overwhelm in these days anyway, seem to come from our internal world as opposed to the external world of the saber-toothed tiger. So what threatens us is often, that thought of, oh, I don't have enough time, or I can't do all these emails, and we start to get ourselves kind of all worked up. And those thoughts are really, those thoughts are an aboutness. They're not really what's happening in the present moment. Yes, we're thinking in the present moment, but the content of that thought is really not the reality of what we're experiencing. So we need to ground back into that reality of what we're experiencing, which is sight and sound and touch. I think too, what's very helpful, not necessarily unique, but helpful, is sometimes people find a movement practice, more grounding. Certainly I found that in my own experience, that when I'm leaning towards more apprehension, a movement practice. So, so experiment, experiment. Good. Well, whoa, look at the time. I think we've just run out of questions.
Whoa, yeah, I'm just noticing the time.
Right, perfect. Yeah. Sorry too much, guys.
No, don't apologize at all. Thank you so much, Dr. McDonald, for your time this evening, but for this knowledge. I mean, it really is always so impressive to me. I've heard this for several months, but to hear it again, it's so refreshing. And I know we had some incredible questions tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
And one of them was really important to me is, is there sort of like this best practice, or is there a form of meditation that's better than the others? Not that I found. And really what I hope, Dr. McDonald introduced tonight was something a bit different, something newer. The wheel of awareness is maybe just a little bit more tangible for some of us, or it's a bit of an easier entry point into what mindfulness practice is. And it's not always beating yourself up, for sitting with your eyes closed and then getting lost in thought. You've, like Dr. McDonald said, had a mindful moment. So, that you just have this way, Dr. McDonald, of bringing some insight into otherwise very basic concepts, ones that we've heard in different mindfulness practices, and thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would close in saying, just to add to that, is the best mindfulness practice is one that you do.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you again for such a healthy reminder. And I see some people thanking you in the Q&A.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was going to
Yeah, for
share.
those interested, yes, we will have this recorded and put on our YouTube. So stay tuned for that the next day or so. But we'll be mindful of Dr. McDonald's time. And again, thank you for your.
It's been my great pleasure, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, good.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, have a good evening, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.